Hey guys, it's been a really long time since I have recorded my own video. Sorry. If you were looking for romance content, this is not going to be it either. I'm just going to give you guys like a quick heads up of where I've been, and then I am going to give you guys some podcast recommendations for podcasts that have absolutely been sustaining my soul while I have been going through this kind of wild period of my life. So a lot of things have happened this fall semester. So as you all may know, I am a PhD student. I am getting my PhD in education, and for those of you who don't know, there's like, I feel like a lot of people think there's like the coursework and then the dissertation, and that's kind of all people really think about when they hear about PhD work, which is fine. You're not supposed to know more of this because you don't need it in your brainstem. I do. There is actually a phase between coursework and the dissertation that is called the comprehensive examination. In some fields it's also called the qualifying exam, which I think gives you a little bit more of like a key into what the purpose of this is. Basically, the stages of the PhD are: you do your coursework, you complete your comprehensive or qualifying exam, which basically is like, yes, you are ready and knowledgeable enough to go out and do your dissertation. And at that point, you move from being a doctoral student to a doctoral candidate. And it is something where you have to present and you have to pass in front of your committee. So that's a whole thing. In my particular field, I have to write 2 gigantic papers and then present them, defend them to my committee, which is made up of 3 professors, one of which is my advisor. I spent all summer working on these papers. I finished my coursework actually last fall. I was unable to do very much work on these papers in the spring because of teaching and working and life and all this type of stuff. So I was not employed over the summer, which was very stressful. I used what I had in savings to basically sustain me for a couple of months so that I could get these done. And as of last week, I have officially defended and passed my comprehensive examinations. And so that is like a huge accomplishment in my life that I have completed. It took a lot of work. It was very stressful. These are flowers from Megan because of that defense. So that alone has been a lot. There's also just been like a lot of health stuff going on in my life. You can't see because this is the top of me, but I am currently wearing a walking boot. I currently cannot bend my left foot because the tendons are swollen, and because of wearing the boot to keep my tendons from continuing to swell, unfortunately my knee has also begun to swell. So I'm also wearing a knee brace. So basically my left leg is becoming very bionic. I can't move around a lot very easily without pain. You know, I had to deal with this while I was doing my comps work, and also I am still teaching this semester. So between that and some health issues, and in fact death in my family this fall, there's been a lot. I'm very tired, and I literally have just been so tired that I have not been able to even read for fun because my brain has just been like, So outside of making like the reading roundtable videos, you know, Michaela and I have even had to delay some content that we were trying to get up because I just could not wrap my brain around words that weren't like for my comps or like for me trying to teach my students because I teach freshman college writing. So it's been a lot. But while I haven't been reading, I have been listening to a lot of podcasts, and I have had some really good ones and some interesting ones that I want to talk about. And so get ready for some recommendations for scams and scandals. So the first one that I want to talk about is actually something that is related to things that I've already discussed on this channel, and that is the story of Elizabeth Holmes and the medical startup Theranos that turned into one of the biggest disasters, scams, and scandal in Silicon Valley in quite some time. The reason that I brought this up previously was because I did a book to documentary review of both the John Carreyrou book, Bad Blood, which was kind of like the definitive investigative reporter report on this entire thing that was turned into a book. And then the Alex Gibney documentary, which I had watched, and I just became so fascinated with this entire situation. There was also a Hulu TV show with Amanda Seyfried. I didn't end up watching that because it was fictionalized. But while I was like kind of scrolling through podcasts and trying to like find something to listen to, I realized that The Dropout on Hulu was actually based on a podcast series, and that podcast series not only covered the same type of stuff that was covered in Bad Blood and was covered in the documentary, interviewing people, but also then had a second season which followed the entire trial of Elizabeth Holmes. And so that felt like really new information that I was interested in. So I did listen to this podcast, again, called The Dropout from ABC News. This was narrated for the most part by it says ABC News Chief Business Technology and Economics Correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis. There were a few that she wasn't there for in the second series, but that's fine. The two seasons, again, there's like the one that covers the actual scandal, and then there's one that covers the trial of Elizabeth Holmes. The first season is obviously far, I don't want to say better put together, I don't think that's fair. It's more cinematically put together because it has the benefit of having been created after this whole thing came to light. So it's able to provide, interviews with people, a more like bird's eye analysis of everything that was going on. And I think was able to just be like plotted and scripted a little bit more in the same way that like the documentary and the book were. I enjoyed that. I do think that we heard from some people that either you didn't hear as much of in the documentary and the book, but also a lot of the information, just because the story was basically the same, was repeated. I thought it was a good refresher, and I certainly listened to every second of every episode. But I do feel like with that first season, if you have, especially if you've read the book, but if you've read the documentary, that first season might not be of as much interest to you. The second season is very, very different in production, because what it essentially is a day-by-day, like, explanation of what happened in the Elizabeth Holmes trial. There is some repeats of some interviews that were done for the first season, because quite a bit of that testimony like wasn't allowed to be taped in audio. They do read some transcripts as well. But again, because it's like day by day, it's very like this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and then getting reaction from some people that are basically commentators for ABC News who are lawyers or experts on some of the testimony that's being given, jury experts, that type of a thing. The two seasons are very, very different production-wise. Like I said, you should not expect the same thing from both. They're not the same type of podcast, and that's fine. I don't think they were ever intended to be, but I understand that for some people that could be a little bit jarring. I feel like those episodes probably didn't feel quite as repetitive in the second season if you were listening to them as they were released, as the trial went along. However, I was just able to binge them, so sometimes I was like, okay, this just feels really repetitive. Like, I just listened to the first season and like now we're repeating some of this information. But obviously that's because I listened to them back to back to back. That's my fault. I will say that as someone who is like very, very like obsessed with this entire thing, I really appreciated having the day by day, even if some of it was a little boring or less like, cinematically stitched together, just because again, that's not what they were trying to do. Because I did not realize until this moment that Elizabeth did take the stand in her own defense, and like the back and forth with the lawyers and everything. So because I also do enjoy listening to legal podcasts, I think I found that element quite interesting. But yeah, I'm really interested in this. Maybe the podcast isn't your thing. You can go check out my review of the book and the documentary. But I find this entire situation so interesting. So moving on, I want to talk to you guys about Scamanda. That is the name of it, Scamanda, like Scam and Amanda put together. This is a scam about a woman named Amanda, you may have guessed. This is a finished podcast from Lionsgate Sound. It was narrated by the journalist Charlie Webster. And this was something that I actually came across because Hulu is making a documentary based on the podcast. However, Hulu has delayed the release of this documentary. So maybe when that comes out, I'll do a little bit more content on this and see, because I feel like there is so much more to this story than just what they had on the podcast, because it's like kind of ish continuing. Anyway, getting ahead of myself. So the podcast starts out by introducing you to a woman named Amanda. She is a young woman who is a young mother when she is diagnosed with cancer. It is a very advanced cancer, and so she starts telling people at her church, in her life, that unless she gets very, very expensive treatments, she is not going to survive. And so, of course, the people in her community, in her church, in her family, her extended family, rally around her and are doing fundraisers. She becomes someone who is very outspoken at her church and at other cancer organization events. She does fundraising, you know, the marathons, all that type of stuff. And so for many people, even though she is suffering, her journey is very inspirational on a number of levels. And she is running a blog. That's how she kind of hits a more, you know, more than just her community audience. She runs a blog where she details not just, you know, her life story, but like what seems to be the real like details, good and bad, about going through very invasive cancer treatments. However, this entire thing ends up to be a total fraud. And what I love about the way the documentary kind of frames it is that they introduce you to the surface story first, which I thought was a really nice way to learn about Amanda and the people that are involved in the story and their backstory, because like it's really complicated even from go, okay? So when Amanda is diagnosed with cancer and starts her blog, she is married to a gentleman, and they have at that point one small child. Her husband has another daughter with another woman, and Amanda actually became known to this family when she was a teenager because she used to babysat their two combined girls. So there's another daughter as well who is not related to Amanda's now husband. It's very complicated. But yeah, so Amanda is like known to the family. The daughters kind of thought that she was like an older sister who then, once their parents divorce, become their stepmom, and it's like all really awkward, and that alone is like its own story. And so understanding the family dynamics, it really helps when you're introduced to the story at like the top layer of what it looks like to the outside world before it really starts to delve into the layers of the scam. Because the farther and farther and farther this podcast go along, there is more layers and layers and layers. And just when you think like this is not possible, this is wild, there's another layer. And there is like lawsuits and threats, and it hits the national scale at a certain point. Oh my gosh. I, again, was mostly just interested in the story, its connections to just like the scandal. The Hulu trailer looked really good. And so when that got delayed, I thought I would listen to the podcast because I was in between having things to listen to. And I'm so glad that I did, because I think the podcast was really excellently put together. They really thought about the pacing and what to reveal when. Again, it's called Scamanda, right? So it's not a haha that she is faking her cancer. The real twist is just how many layers there are to the scam and how deep it goes. And I mean, just how many lives in the end are truly ruined, especially when you think about the young children that Amanda had and her stepdaughters. And it's, by the end, I was like in tears over their journey, because they have gone through so much, and for what, really? So lastly, I'd like to end by recommending the podcast American Scandal by Wondery. This is narrated by Wondery's Lindsey Graham, who has the fantastic social media handle of Not That Lindsey Graham, which is also, I found that super weird when I first started listening to this podcast and heard his name, but this is Not That Lindsey Graham. This is a huge podcast with a bunch of, shall we say, mini arcs or episodes. The general gist of this is every scandal begins with a lie, but the truth will come out, and then comes the fallout and the outrage. Scandals have shaped America since its founding, from business and politics to sports and society. We look on aghast as corruption, deceit, and ambition bring down heroes and celebrities, politicians, and moguls. And when the dust finally settles, we're left to wonder, how did this happen? I can't even tell you why I clicked on this podcast originally, because the first mini arc, if you will, because it tells a bajillion different stories through anywhere from like 2 to I think 7 episodes is the longest one I've seen when they did Waco. And the first one was about steroids in baseball. And again, I'm a baseball fan, so I did find that interesting, but I won't say that I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely something that I want to listen to. I had kind of looked down the list and I had seen things like Waco, Iran-Contra, Watergate, the Exxon Valdez scandal, the Enron scandal, Bernie Madoff, and I was like, oh, there are some things like further down this list I might be more interested in, but I'll just start at the beginning because that's who I am. I'm a completionist. There are like dramatized bits where they like kind of reenact scenes, and then interviews with either people who were there or experts. So it's like a combined podcast. And it's mostly done by Lindsey Graham. Like the dramatized bits are all his voice. I have found that even on topics that I did not think that I was going to be super interested in, I have just been totally engrossed in these stories. And what I really appreciate is how at the end of every single mini arc, there is a intention from Lindsey Graham and the writers to kind of like connect this to now, or kind of like talk about this as a really important thing that we need to think about as like a historical moment that either we haven't fixed or has had this type of impact on our laws. And so I always know that even if I'm not super interested in the story itself, there's going to be some kind of historical contextualization at the end of the podcast that will make it really clear, if they don't at the beginning, because I usually like allude to something at the beginning, like why it's important, but by the end, you're really going to know like why this is important to the way that our life is now. And that's not always true with every history podcast, and I've really appreciated that intentionality. Again, even in the ones that I wasn't super interested in. But I mean, like the Boston College basketball scandal, I had no idea what that was. That was really interesting. About the mob, surprisingly, no idea. I'd always wanted to know more about the Enron scandal. There's a whole series on that, and wildly, even though that concept, like what happened at Enron should have been like really complicated mathematically and really confusing, it still manages to explain it in a way that I understood. The talks with Alaskan fishermen about the oil spill out of the Exxon Valdez, their interviews and descriptions of what happened to them and the wildlife in Alaska made me cry. Oh my gosh, I mean, just so much. I know this is a little bit different than my normal content, but this has just been where my brain has been at. I'm really hoping that now that I am past this point, I will be able to get back to making romance content for you guys. But until then, I'm going to go put my foot up. And I hope that this has at least introduced you to a new podcast or two that you might be interested in listening to. If you have any recommendations for me, please place them down below. Thanks, guys.